Anikinewaya, everybody, and welcome to the Ndè Sı book panel. We're very excited to be here with you all today at NAISA North Virtual, presenting this new work that is forthcoming from ARP Books in June of 2022. I'm going to start by sharing my screen so that you can see our book cover. The cover was designed by Leanne Charlie. Leanne Charlie is a contributor to the book. She is an artist and she is a faculty member at the Dechinta Center for Research and Learning. And Leanne is Northern Tutchone. And so she spent a lot of time with the different pieces in this book. She came up with this gorgeous cover. So this is forthcoming from ARP Books in June. It's a collection of really, really powerful writing from Northern Indigenous peoples focused on land, life, and art. My name is Leanne Bidasmuse-Simpson. I am faculty at the Dechinta Center for Research and Learning. I'm Métis and a band member of Alderville First Nation, and I'm one of the editors of this book. I'm going to introduce you to our two other editors, my co-editors, Kyla LeSage, who will be speaking later on the panel and who will also be sharing her piece in the book, and Thumli Drybones Voigt, who is our third editor and who's also going to be sharing one of or her piece from the book as well. I'm going to begin by reading from our introduction to give you a sense of what our book is about. For the past decade, the Dechinta Center for Research and Learning has engaged in land-based, community-led Indigenous arts and educational programming in the Northwest Territories and Yukon. Our programs are grown from relationships with community land-based practitioners and elders, and we strive to center the voices, knowledge, expertise, and perspectives of Indigenous peoples in the North. In our post-secondary university accredited programming, we've often pulled together reading packages from books, websites, magazines, blogs, and journals to provide our students with relevant course material centering the voices and experience of Indigenous Northerners. But we wanted to do more. We wanted to bring the immense beauty and rigor of Northern Indigenous storytellers, writers, practitioners, artists, academics, and thinkers, not only to our students, but to a wider audience. To this end, Kyla LeSage, Thumli Drybones Voigt, and Leanne Bidasmuse-Simpson came together as part of a larger Dechinta community to edit this anthology. Kyla is Vuntut Gwitchin, an Anishinaabe from Garden River, Ontario. She is a past Dechinta alumni and the current land-based academic coordinator and regional outreach coordinator. Thumli is Dënesòłiné from Yellowknives Dene First Nation and is also a Dechinta alumni. I'm Anishinaabe, a longtime instructor in our land-based programming and a member of our board. As an editorial collective, educators, land-based practitioners, and of course readers, we are deeply appreciative of the elders, language speakers, and oral storytellers that have given so much to our peoples and our students. We are also grateful to the Northern Indigenous writers we've used in our past courses: George Blondin, Maurice Nayali, Siku Alulu, Phoebe Nahani, Tunshai Redfords, Richard Van Camp, Katlia Lafferty, Glenn Coulthard, Leanne Marie Lida Charlie, Sheila Watt Cloutier, Ronalta Arluck, and Tanya Tagak, to name just a few. We are also grateful to the many storytellers and oral historians that have shared their wisdom with our students through story and practice. Fred Sangreese, Mary Rose Sundberg, Paul Mackenzie, Madeline Judas, Alice Wilflat, Frederick Andrew, Sam Gargan, Norman Steria, and Grady Steria, again, to name just a few. It has been an honor to witness Northern Indigenous students connecting to these storytellers and practitioners and seeing their own lives and experiences reflected back to them on the page. In many ways, this work has uplifted our students and inspired them to find their own voices, and we are so proud to include over 10 Dechinta alumni in this book project. We were also committed to reaching out beyond our Dechinta community in this project to include pieces from emerging Indigenous Northern writers from across the Yukon, Northwest Territories, Nunavut, Nunavik, Alaska, Northern British Columbia, and Alberta. We wanted to hold up the voices of Indigenous women and Two-Spirit and queer writers. We wanted to curate a choir of voices reflecting a deep love of Indigenous cultures, languages, homelands, and the North. We wanted to include oral historians, language experts, and land-based practitioners. We wanted readers to be transformed by the power of Inuit women writing, singing, creating, and challenging. To this end, we posted an open call for submissions on social media where we were generously met with a wealth of Dene, Gwich'in, Sahtú, Dehcho, Clicho, Saysi, Kaska, Dënesòłiné, Wıìlıìdeh, Inuit, Alutiiq, Inuvialuit, Métis, Nêhiyawak, Northern Tutchone, and Tanana Athabascan creative brilliance. We reached out to artists, musicians, language experts, and knowledge holders in the form of interviews and conversations to bring as many stories as possible into the book. Some very strong themes quickly emerged from reading the submissions. Writers wrote passionately about family, land, culture, community, and language. Language expert and contributor Mary Rose Sundberg encouraged us to include as many Northern languages as we could. And because of the oral nature of these languages, we have left spellings up to individual authors. Writers like Antoine Mountain, Kyla LeSage, Angela Code, and Josh Baracello, along with Mero's songwriting and Dene laws, with Wıìlıìdeh, which is the first piece in the book, brought this richness to the text. We then commissioned a series of pieces from Northern Indigenous artists. Singer-songwriter Wıìlıìdeh teaches us about Dene music in her piece, The Song We All Should Be Listening To. Randy Belarange tells the phenomenal story of how he became lead singer for the Wıìlıìdeh Drummers. Inuit sisters, songwriters, and throat singers Tiffany Ayalik and Inuksuq McKay of Tilksilk brought the power of Inuit women through their interview and discussion of performance, artistic practice, and resistance in Canada and beyond. Two-Spirit Vuntut Gwitchin visual artist Janine Frina-Jutli talks snowmobiles, frequency, mosquitoes, and their community-immersed artistic practice. Inuk singer-songwriter and documentary filmmaker Alyssa P. discusses the work her films, videos, and albums do in the North and beyond, and singer-songwriter Beatrice Deer discusses the Northern Inuit roots of her songwriting. In the art of Dene hand games and stick gambling, Angela Code takes us inside Dene hand games to reveal the cultural work these gatherings do in the North. Visual artist and academic Camille Georgeson Usher writes about the connection and belonging in a letter to our damaged earth. In addition to pieces by poets Tanya Lucan Linklater and Diane Million, poet Tunchai Redfern's prose are in constant conversation with the land in remembering, renaming, and reconnecting. Their sibling Juniper tells us a story of a solo winter journey back to their ancestral homeland. Chloe Dragon Smith has an intimate conversation with her mom, Brenda Dragon, about parenting, and with Robert Granjum in To Wood Buffalo National Park with Love. The pair write back against the legacy of power and control of Parks Canada that it yields towards lands and peoples once again living within the park in deep reciprocity. Land-based practitioner and educator Noel Lee Cockney shares with us his family's deep connection to their Inuvialuit homeland on the Arctic Ocean. Kristen Tanche tells us her precious story of tanning her first moose hide. It's a story of love, connection, and beautiful Dehcho Dene resistance. Siku Alulu's poem Star Path is set partially in the Mackenzie Mountains, where we held the 2019 Dechinta summer semester, and is grounded in the healing gifted from both that land and her home community in Dene. One part of the book we hold very dear to our hearts are the pieces by Dechinta alumni and emerging writers. Our students and staff come from incredibly rich oral storytelling and artistic cultures rooted in land-based practice. As a result, we had the honor of reading first-time writers express their love of land, culture, and language in our assignments. We are grateful so many of them participated in our writers' workshops and submitted pieces to this book. The brilliance of Northern Indigenous young writers dances off these pages with love letters to water, land, grandparents, and siblings. These are stories of adventures on the land, persistence, connection, and a beautiful sense of belonging. We are grateful for your trust in us as editors, Colleen, Jasmine, Jessica, Taylor, Tyra, and Rachel, and we can't wait to read more. The process of making this book has been one of profound listening. When we began the project, we were unsure if anyone would submit to the project, and our backup plan was to gather previously published work as a more robust reading package to use in our courses. Family and Kyla reached out to so many young writers on social media, encouraging them and supporting them in getting their pieces in. I reached out to established writers and artists to figure out ways of including a diverse set of voices in book form. The writers themselves, through the topics and experiences they chose to focus on and share, defined the thematic scope of the book, and our job became one of holding space, encouraging, and curating rather than directing. In that sense, this book was built from the ground up. It was a communal affair. It was a Northern affair born out of thousands of years of storytelling with the aim of nourishing thousands of more years of Northern Indigenous storytelling. Our hope is that this anthology is not an ending, but the beginning of a listening across geographies, cultures, and time. Our hope is that these writers feed our collective fires. We're so lucky today on this panel to be joined by 5 of the writers that have contributed to this book. Our first writer is Kyla LeSage, who is also one of the editors of the book. Kyla is Vuntut Gwitchin from Old Crow, Yukon, and Anishinaabe from Garden River, Ontario. Kyla grew up on Chief Drygeese Territory in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. She is a Dechinta alumni, where she received credits towards her degree in political science at the University of British Columbia, political science and Indigenous studies. And she now works full-time for Dechinta as the land-based academic and regional outreach coordinator. I'm going to pass things over to Kyla now. Kyla's going to say a few words about the book and also share her piece with us.
Masicho, Leanne. I'm super grateful to be here to share this book with everybody and to also share part of my piece that I submitted. This book was a process in the making, and we came together, and this was the first time I had ever edited a book or even submitted a piece into a book. And I think it's really important to have a platform or to have a piece or a book like Dechinta's book, the one that's coming out, to allow young authors and writers to submit for the first time. I couldn't see myself submitting anywhere else but here, so I'm super excited that I was able to submit a piece and then encourage other young, new writers to also submit so that we have some really important and really great stories and pieces that we can share with not only our Dechinta students during our semesters, but also with the public and with everyone to see near and far. I'm going to read just a small piece, a small tidbit of my piece that is in the book. I actually wrote this when I was at university for a paper, but I realized that the story that was told within my my writing was made to be more personal and to be more of a story rather than an academic writing piece. So I'm super grateful that Leanne really pushed me to get this piece in, and that I had her support and I had Thumb Lee's support along the way to make sure I could get in a part of my writing. So this piece is also coming from my Dechinta semester. So the story is from my Dechinta semester that I've been able to connect with. It's also a teaching that I've been able to really show others and really pass on, not only through them reading this piece, but through me verbally telling the story of my writing. So my piece is called Consent, Learning with the Land. Pick, pack, weave. What's the key to warmth and protection? Sleeping bag? Blankets? Pillow beneath your head? No, he says, Mother Earth is. Our warmth, she is. Our protector, our healer, our blanket. Pick these, pack these, weave these. Is a single branch protection? No, he says, a single branch is a gift. Roots, trees, branches are all gifts waiting to be given. They whisper, take me with you. So I pick, I pack, I weave. And I leave tobacco, masicho. I walk to you next. You are hesitant and stiff. Your branch is firm and attached. No, you cannot pick me. Don't pick me. You say no, and you hold on to a gift not ready to be given, they say. Masicho, but no. I smile and I move on. This is what consent from the land, consent from a spruce tree, looks like to me. I was taught by the Dene elders that consent is not confined to verbal cues, but rooted in experience and teachings that can only be understood if we take the time to listen. My poem tells a story of my experience where I was introduced to a Dene approach to land and consent that was embedded within a sacred practice where we use the branches from a tree for warmth and protection as flooring in our wall tent. By practicing this tradition, the elder, Paul Mackenzie, explained how when we are picking spruce boughs, we must receive consent from the tree in order to use these branches. Paul taught us that while picking spruce boughs, we must be conscious of what we are doing. If you pull on a branch and it does not come apart from the tree, you leave the branch and continue to a different tree. This resistance from the tree is a tree's way of saying it isn't ready to give you that branch. By acknowledging this, we also acknowledge the agency of the tree and its right to say no. If the branch does, however, break when you pull on it, this is the tree's way of consenting to you taking that part of them. I then lay tobacco and say masicho, thank you. This practice of consent extends to all living beings while harvesting, whether that be berries, medicine plants, water, or animals. I have continued to pass on this teaching while I'm out on the land or teaching others on the land. In my role as a youth educator with an on-the-land program, one of the youth was creating a fort in the snow for herself to live in. She was digging, piling snow, and creating a home where when she realized that she was getting cold sitting on the cold, snowy ground, I asked her, what can we use from the land to provide warmth and protection from the cold, snowy ground? She looked around to find something that wasn't already covered in snow. The trees, she said with excitement. Yes, let's go pick some spruce bough branches to use as your floor, I said. This was when I shared with her the teachings of consent that I learned from Elder Paul. I explained to her how we know whether or not a tree is consenting to us taking its branches for our warmth. She then went off on her own, and I heard her say, "This one says no," as she pulled on a branch. Then she continued to a tree that had orange-colored pines and pulled on it. Snap. "This one says yes. Look, look." She came running towards me. I asked her how she knew to pick the orange-colored branch, and she explained that the green pine trees are young trees that aren't done growing yet, so they need time for their branches to grow stronger for us to use. She went on to explain that the older trees have grown long enough for us to use their branches so that they can regrow and become stronger again. I was in awe of the teachings she was telling me without knowing it. The land is our teacher. Growing up, I was far removed from my traditional roots, my traditional territories, and my cultural practices. I was not raised knowing my Gwich'in aunties would spend weeks in the spring and summer tanning hides, or my uncles would go hunting for caribou in the wintertime. I was not raised with my Anishinaabe aunties from Garden River harvesting Monoman wild rice or picking sweetgrass. Although I was never introduced to my own traditions as a child, I have been grateful to learn the Dene way of life from elders and community members in Treaty 8 territory. It was by returning to the land and learning from elders that I realized how much of myself I was missing, and my passion to learn the Dene way of life, in hopes that when I return to my traditional territories, I will have similar teachings and skills to bring. So that's a bit of my piece. Amasi Cho at the end. I'd like to acknowledge and thank all of the elders and teachers who have helped me think through my relationship with the land and influenced my understanding of consent, including Paul McKenzie, James Sangries, Moreau Sunberg, and Leanne Batasmosak Simpson. Masi Cho. I really hope you guys enjoyed that. And if you want to read or listen to the full version, then you'll have to go and buy the book and you'll be able to read it.
Miigwech, Kyla, thank you so much for that reading. That was really beautiful. Our next reader is Thumli. Thumli is also an editor of the book, and so we'll be hearing from her on those two topics. Thumli is the daughter of Eileen Drybones and Anthony Folliette. As a child, she lived on a houseboat, played on Great Slave Lake, and walked up the hill to school. Thumli's mother grew up living on the land with her grandparents, Madeline and Noel Drybones at Fort Reliance, and she was very lucky to see them live a traditional Dene life. Her mother took her hunting, and she would watch her grandmother tan hides, bead, and sew. After finishing high school, Thumli worked at a number of little jobs, traveled, and then went to the Dechinta Center for Research and Learning, where she had a place to hone her skills. At present, Thumli works part-time at Dechinta and full-time as a mother. In July 2019, she had a daughter who is at the present time the center of her universe. Take it away, Thumli.
So, Leanne, that was a beautiful reading of your story, Kyla. Thank you so much. It's one thing to read, but to be read to, I find just so magical. Okay, so this also is my first book that I have entered a submission to, and the first book that I've had the pleasure of editing. It's really such an incredible experience being, I guess, in the Dechinta family, being a student, and then also working for Dechinta. There's always such a sense of community that I don't think I could find in another job the same. So just masi cho to all of my elders and teachers in bringing me to this point, and I'm happy to share this this piece with you. So it's just going to be a portion of it that I'll read for you now. So this story was told to me by my mother, Aileen Drybones, who received it from her ama, Madeline Drybones. Now I have my mother's permission to continue to share this story, which I've been working with since I was young. It is a story of how the Dene people received spruce gum. It happened when the world was young, and some animals we know today were giant. A camp of Dene waiting for caribou that never came, and as they began to starve, they sent the strongest and best hunters to search. No one returns. In desperation, they send one more hunter who never returns. Then another Dene, who is clever, sets off to find caribou. This one clever Dene follows the trail of the others up a big mountain. At the top, they can see the land. It looks beautiful, but down the mountain is a dark area. Like the others, they slide down the mountain until they find themselves trapped. Looking around, they don't see what has caught them. Confused, the Dene sits, and as they do, they come to remember elders once speak of medicine, of the sun snare. The Dene doesn't have medicine powers of their own, and they know they are no match for ones with such strong medicine. Sitting there, the Dene decides that the best choice would be to be clever, sit and wait, and see who comes to check the snare. Before too long, Dene starts to feel the earth rumble. Looking up in the distance, they can see a small black dot moving across the land. Boom, boom, boom. With each advancing step, the ground quakes and the Dene sees giant wolverine. The Dene knows wolverine is strong and smart and vicious. Wolverine used the sun snare to catch up all the caribou. The Dene thinks, I'm no match for wolverines, but I am clever and I can outsmart Wolverine. I lay here and pretend to be dead. The Wolverine comes over to look at the Dene and says, hey, this person is already dead. Wolverine unsnares the Dene, picks them up and puts them in a bag. Off they go back to Wolverine camp. Boom, boom, boom. That Dene is scared now. Their belly begins to turn and rumble. Before they know it, out comes a big fart. That Wolverine jumps up and grabs the Dene out of the bag and lays him on the ground. Poking the Dene's belly, Wolverine says, I guess my meat isn't that fresh. It has started decomposing. That Dene doesn't say a word. Wolverine puts that farting Dene back into the bag and keeps walking. Boom, boom, boom. Before too long, that Dene's stomach begins to turn and rumble. And before they know it, they let out another big fart. This time, Wolverine says, hey, if you're trying to be clever, I will catch you. That Dene doesn't say a word. Now Wolverine is suspicious as they come to his camp. Boom, boom, boom. Again, that Dene's stomach turns and rumbles, and out comes a really big fart. Wolverine throws that Dene down and this time says, hey, are you alive? That Dene says nothing. Without warning, Wolverine lifts up that Dene's arm and he begins to tickle their armpit. He tickles their toes, he tickles their belly, but that Dene doesn't laugh. Wolverine says, I guess you really are dead, and you just have some last gas leaving your body. Deciding that Dene really was dead all along, he slips the body back in the bag and they continue to Wolverine camp. Wolverine is giant and can travel fast, so in no time they get to Wolverine camp. The Dene can smell something horrific. The Dene gently opens their eyes to see that they have arrived at a giant tree hut with Mother Wolverine and 2 teenager Wolverines and a baby. By the fire, that Dene can see the body of one of the hunters cut down the center with his guts spilling out. Mother Wolverine has already finished cooking one big hunk of hunter on the fire. Baby Wolverine, sitting on the steps, complains, "I don't like this meat. Why do we have to eat it? It's so disgusting." The Mother Wolverine says, "Quiet now. We are grateful your father has brought us this meat." Looking at the Father Wolverine, she says, "Put that away and come eat now." The Dene is laid on a fresh spruce boughs by the bodies of the other hunters. After the Wolverine's belly is full, he lays down to have a nap. That Dene, getting restless laying on the spruce boughs, opens their eyes. Baby Wolverine is looking, so that Dene gives him a wink. Baby Wolverine says, "Look, look, he's alive!" Mother Wolverine scolds that baby Wolverine, saying, "That's enough now. Leave that food alone." So Baby Wolverine skulks off with a big yawn. Wolverine wakes up, looks around, and goes back to sleep for a few hours. All the while, that poor Dene has been laying on the boughs. Mother Wolverine builds up the fire again. Wolverine wakes up, takes his birch knife, and goes over to that Dene and tries to cut into the Dene, but the knife is dull. Wolverine says, my wife, pass me that stone knife. This one is dull." Next, he uses the stone knife. Again, the knife is too dull. Wolverine is annoyed, says, my wife, you didn't sharpen any of these knives. Pass me that bone knife. That one will cut through anything." Wolverine takes the bone knife, first cutting through the Dene's caribou hide jacket. Next is the rabbit skin. The Dene carefully slips his leg and throws the Wolverine off balance. The Dene jumps through him onto the fire. One by one, he throws them all into the fire, all but the baby Wolverine, who was safe at a safe distance. The baby Wolverine climbs into a spruce tree, but that Dene is coming after them. Baby Wolverine says, "Stop! Wait, I have something for you. Take that rock on the ground there and smash my paw on the side of the tree." The Dene does this, and from the paw runs fat and blood onto the tree. You see, this is medicine. From that day, it will heal you and your people, and we will leave you alone. To this day, we use this medicine, but the Wolverine lied about not stealing. Wolverine never grew any bigger than that baby, so they're no longer giant. Just as children laying on the spruce boughs on the ground doesn't make a fully woven floor. In my youth, it was easiest to comprehend the literal meanings of this story. Walking in the bush, collecting spruce gum, I marveled at the beauty of the Wolverine's medicine power. Out on the spruce trees runs the blood and the fat of baby Wolverine's paw, just as the baby promised the Dene so long ago. The spruce trees will always carry Wolverine's medicine as a gift. The story explains how we received the gift of spruce gum and how Wolverine became the size they are today. Wolverines were greedy for the caribou and they disrupted others. The baby that survived did not grow any further. The Wolverines are no longer giant. The Dene come to agreements. The way Dene come to agreements is to make verbal treaties. The results of this treaty is still seen today on the trees dripping with gum. This is the story of how the Dene received the powerful medicine of the spruce gum, known for its healing properties. Storytelling has deepened my knowledge of the land and Dene communities by being examples of how to live in a good way. In community, stories connect each other. We share personal stories. We learn how to be gentle with each other. This creates supportive communities. I have known and been working with the Wolverine story for many years, yet I can see the progression of what new teachings I learn each time I revisit it. During my time at Dechinta, I noticed storytelling always seems to happen at the exact moment it's needed, or you're ready. Elders usually don't gather everyone around to tell a big story. Most of the time, it happens in a casual way. I've heard many other stories at Dechinta, and for most of them, I happen to be in the right place at the right time. Oral stories are never told exactly the same way, and people may receive different lessons that are intimate and personal. There are many ways to tell stories, and stories are meant to have intentional outcomes for the listener. Elders are very deliberate with their actions and their words, and when it comes to telling stories, they're interwoven with values and lessons. This represents how the value of non-interference and self-determination, and how we are all in charge of our own personal growth. This is then reflected in our communities. This is my understanding that I have the boughs and I am starting to weave, and I will continue to work alongside elders who have expertly woven the values of Dene laws into their lives in many ways, encouraging us to live in a good way. To them, to the themes, bones, structure, base, and boughs, if you will. The story are always the same. The caribou go missing, the Dene go in search of them, the wolverine and the Dene battle, and in the end, the Dene receive the spruce gum. The story changes from one storyteller to the next, just as the same storyteller can tell the same story multiple times, and each time it changes. Repeating the story verbatim is a safe place to start storytelling. Just as children know to put the spruce boughs down on the ground, it doesn't make a fully woven floor. It's my belief that I should stay true to my nature and let the story come to me as it feels right. Elders have the knowledge and use stories to help deepen awarenesses within ourselves. Understanding our stories help us find our voices. When we use our voice to weave our own stories, we are building spruce bough foundations our ancestors would be proud of. So that's just a portion of the piece that I submitted to the book. I hope you read more of it. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'd just like to say Masi Cho to everyone who supported me along the way to writing this. And I'm just so immensely grateful for the Dechinta family that I have. Masi Cho.
Masi Cho family, that's such a beautiful story, and you retell it in a beautiful way. And so thank you so much for your submission and for telling that story to us today. Our next reader is Christina Gray. Christina is Tsimshian and a Dene citizen. She is an associate at JFK Law Corporation, where she practices in the area of Aboriginal law. She is currently completing her Master's of Law at the University of Victoria. Her research focuses on issues of gender, within the Tsimshian legal tradition. She has a law and art history degree from the University of British Columbia. So Masi Cho, Christina, for joining us today, and we're so looking forward to your reading.
Thanks for the introduction, Leanne, and for the invitation to join everyone on this virtual dialogue this morning. This short piece I wrote in 2018, in the fall and winter of 2018, and I wrote it when I was taking a Law 501 course in the Law and Society program at the University of Victoria, and I didn't know what I was going to write, and I just started writing, and this is what became of it. This is a different version of what I wrote at that time, and I don't think I could have written anything else. It just flowed from my fingers at a time when I was having a lot of trouble writing. And it's called Buffalo Bones and Hope, 2 Dene stories. So I always remember that, and I want to thank him for that. That's about all. So in talking about connection and disconnection, I'll share 2 stories about both my father and myself. My father, Joey, was born in Yellowknife and raised by my great-grandparents who were fluent speakers of the Chipewyan language. When he was 9, the Canadian government forcibly removed Joey from the loving care of our family. He went to La Pointe Hall Residential School in the Northwest Territories. Then, in 1970, at the age of 11, he was transferred to Brainat Hall. As a result of attending these 2 residential schools, there were long-lasting detrimental effects on both Joey's life and on my own too. I had a lot of difficulty in trying to connect with Joey and learn more about his early experiences in life. He rarely talked about his experiences attending residential schools unless I prompted him and asked him about it. For me, it's been a lifelong process of trying to understand that history that so vastly impacted both of our lives. These are hard words for me to write and also share. Our 2 Dene stories are overlapping, intersecting, and there's an inexplicable tension that exists between them. I'm offering vignettes of narratives relating to my own experiences. Part of his experience at residential school, state assimilationist policies, reconciliation, and the collective reclaiming and revitalization that is happening. In 2013, I moved to Ontario to train to become a lawyer. I missed the walk for reconciliation that happened in Vancouver. I missed hearing my father speak at the walk where he shared his experience in attending residential school. I was proud of him for doing that, but for years, I could not bring myself to search for the video that he provided because it was too painful. But after Joey's death, I watched his interview that is now part of the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Center. Joey spoke about his experience at Brainat Hall and had this to say. The second time, when I was in Fort Smith, Chief Dan George came up. This was when I was about 11. He went up there and shot a buffalo. He shared it with all the students in the residential school. All the junior boys were at the front, and then the intermediates and seniors would be in the back because they could look over the shorter kids in the front. Chief Dan George looked at me. He could tell I didn't want to be there, but he looked right at me in the eye. He said something to me. It was kind of telepathic. It was just like he said, "Don't worry about it. You won't be here forever. Stick with it, and you'll be out sooner or later." So I always remembered that, and I want to thank him for that. That's about all. There's such a strong and profound sense of sadness and desperation captured in that story. I can feel the tangible sense of isolation, and his words impart a sense of dislocation and despair. But in that small moment, I also felt hope, a gift given by Chief Dan George in his compassionate words that also ultimately rang true, as eventually Joey did leave residential school. But he didn't leave without the specter of colonialism looming over him. The traumatic experiences from early life at residential school haunted him until the end. Joey died in palliative care after many years of battling addiction and complicated health issues. It was really the last 10 years of his life that signaled his demise, but I know that he lived with the pain from his childhood trauma from residential schools for much longer. I know that he also had hopes and dreams too. He had an insatiable intellect and dreamed of becoming a helicopter pilot. It is unbearable that Joey, like so many other Indigenous peoples, had dreams that never materialized because of residential schools and other similar child welfare policies like the 60s scoop. It is unbearable in realizing that I really did not get to know Joey. I was raised by my mom in East Vancouver, far away from our Dene and Tsimshian homelands. As a child, I often would dream of living in the north. In the middle of 2020, I moved to Prince Rupert, BC, a small coastal town on the unceded Tsimshian territories. I made this move to connect to the land, peoples, and learn the Tsimshian language of Somaliach. My lived experience is quite different from past generations before me, but in some ways our stories intersect as a result of our perseverance to connect to the land and acting otherwise against oppressive forces. And in this place, with my own specters, I myself am trying to learn more and tell Joey's story, a story inextricably linked to the history and legacy of residential schools in the north. I'll provide a short snapshot of residential schools in the Northwest Territories. The aim of settler colonialism and its project was the elimination of Indigenous peoples. The settler colonial logic of elimination is orchestrated in a variety of ways, such as through residential schools and other policies of dispossession. At the core was the assimilation of Indigenous children into Canadian society. The federal government and churches were integral to this tragic legacy of assimilationist policy. Their will was done through legislating compulsory attendance of Indigenous children to attend residential schools throughout Canada. The residential schools in the Northwest Territories opened in 1867 at Fort Providence, which is located at South Slave Lake. By the 1950s, when the rest of Canada, many residential schools were declining in numbers, the opposite was occurring in the Northwest Territories as the federal government continued to open more residential schools. Amongst other enduring harms, placing generations of Indigenous children into residential schools also cleared a pathway for the Canadian state to increase natural resource extraction in the north, evidenced by many diamond, uranium, and gold mines of today. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final report notes that the government expanded the residential school system and their policy of assimilation through building residences across the north. They did this despite reports that children would not acquire the skills necessary to live in the north, skills they would have otherwise have acquired in their home communities. The specialized Indigenous knowledge and skills necessary to thrive in the north, such as hunting, trapping, and other skills, are evident in other parts of the interview with Joey. In the interview, he speaks about the harsh treatment of children that ran away and the bullying that ensued after children returned to residential schools. I'll read an excerpt. This is the question. So you said that some of the kids used to run away, but it was an island, so you had to be a good swimmer if you needed to succeed. What happened to them when they got caught? When they got caught, some of them used to get roughed up. They knew who to pick on and who not to pick on. Like myself, they never really bothered me because I got a phone call every Sunday. I was always in touch with my family. I always had money in my account for canteen. But there were other children there that their parents were trappers, and they would go on the trap line in the fall and they wouldn't come out until the spring. So basically, they were the ones that got picked on the most because they knew there was no one there to defend them. But all those kids were really good in the bush. They could take off and survive out there if they had to. But after it got dark, especially when it's 40 or 50 below weather, and even the fall time, it's inclement weather, it's raining and gusting. The story is difficult to fully comprehend, but also helps to explain why some Indigenous people have difficulty with the language of forgiveness that is part of reconciliation. I'll end with this. In the era of reconciliation, the language of forgiveness replaced the language of political recognition. Dene political science scholar Glenn Coulthard asks in Red Skin, White Masks, what are we to make of those who refuse and/or reconcile in these situations? They are typically cast aside as being they are typically cast as being saddled by the damaging psychological residue of this legacy, of which anger and resentment are frequently highlighted. And so I want to end there and thank the others on the call for sharing their stories and also giving me the space to share this story. This is the first time that I've shared this story publicly and also read from it publicly. So I want to thank you all. Thanks so much. Masicho.
Masicho, Christina, that was really moving and really powerful. And so thank you for your bravery and for your voice. It was really beautiful to hear you read that. So Masicho. Our next reader is Rachel Cloudray. Rachel was born and raised in Samba Cay, or Yellowknife, Danande, where she lives today. She is Nêhiyawak English and a paddler and a land-based program advocate. In 2019, she completed a Bachelor of Commerce, specializing in entrepreneurship at the University of Victoria. Rachel also has a certificate in land-based research from Dechinta and the University of British Columbia. She is currently studying in a Master's of Land-Based Education program at the University of Saskatchewan, where her work focuses on developing a canoe training program from an Indigenous paradigm. Being on the land makes Rachel feel whole. This is why she is passionate about strengthening people's connection to land, as she believes it is the foundation for the resurgence of Indigenous cultures, languages, and ways of being. And Rachel is also a new addition to the Dechinta team. So I'm so grateful to have you with us today, Rachel.
Hello. Yeah, I'm so honored for the opportunity to share my story, and I'm so grateful for the support and encouragement I've had from Leanne, Thumley, and Kyla throughout this process. One of those new writers who wrote an assignment for a Dechinta class that they talked about earlier, and didn't ever really think what I would be writing would be published, so it's kind of cool to get to this point. And I think it's especially cool for me because when I was young, like a young kid, my dream was to be a writer, but I eventually just gave up on that dream. So I feel like very young Rachel would be super stoked right now. So I wrote an article called Seaman, and I will read a portion of it for you. So a Dakal elder from Nakada Z, Donald Prince, told me a story about when he was a young man. Having recently reconnected with his father, they spent a year together on the land along with elders, learning about their culture and ways of being. At the end of the year, his father asked, "Son, what are you doing with all the teachings you have learned over the past year?" Pointing his finger to his right temple, the young man replied, "It's all up here, Dad. It's all up here." His dad responded, "It's useless then." The young man was confused. Just as his father had bestowed the teaching onto him, the elder shared this story with me. Knowledge is only valuable and meaningful when you share it with others. If you keep it inside your head, if you keep it to yourself, it will no longer exist when you pass on. This is why it is important to pass down our knowledge from generation to generation, so it does not get lost. Indigenous people share knowledge orally. However, now we are encapsulating our knowledge in writing as well. Books like this one provide a way for those torn from their culture and people to learn from other Indigenous peoples, carry that knowledge with them, and pass it on to future generations. I have struggled and continued to struggle with my identity and the feeling that I don't belong. My mom was part of the 60 scoop, which means she was apprehended from her Nêhiyawak mother and handed over to a white adoptive family. Even as her adoptive family was caring and loving, she was nevertheless separated from her culture, language, and ways of being before she had a chance to learn any of them. My mom only learned she was Nêhiyawak because her adoption paperwork had the word Cree written on it. There was no mention of which Nêhiyawak nation she belonged to. But when my mom was 18, she went searching for her mother and discovered that her birth mother was also part of the 60 scoop. She too had been adopted out to a white family and assimilated into white culture. 2 generations in my family have lost the knowledge of who they belong to and their Nêhiyawak ways of being. I live with these losses. When I am paddling on Nipi, I feel a deep sense of belonging. I feel most safe and secure when I am in a seaman on Nipi. Nipi is strong and resilient. It moves across the land as streams and rivers, pushing soil and breaking down pieces of rock to create new pathways and land formations. Nipi connects us. Rivers, streams, and creeks link lakes to ponds, to oceans and seas, where Nipi is evaporated back into the air and poured down on us again from the sky as rain. Nipi is life. All living beings need Nipi to survive and thrive. I learned to canoe at 17 during a difficult time in my life. I spent many days guiding groups of youth up Wıìlıìdeh, crying in the back of the canoe, but by the end of the day, I would feel so much lighter. Canoeing has been critical for my reconnection with land. This in turn has been the foundation of my healing journey. The land heals, the water heals. My relationship with Nipi has shown me that I carry the same strength and resilience. I too can carve out new pathways and shape the way I want to be in this world. Shortly after learning how to canoe, I became a certified Paddle Canada canoe instructor. I traveled to communities across the Northwest Territories, Nunavut, and Yukon to teach canoeing and guide canoe trips. My discomfort with being a Paddle Canada instructor started during a big canoe course in Dënesòłiné. The participants were leaders of the Wıìlıìdeh, the annual Dehcho Trails of Our Ancestors trip. One of the elders in the course was a phenomenal paddler. He knew all the strokes and maneuvers, and he was excellent at teaching the others in the group. I thought to myself, why isn't this knowledge and skill and way of learning valid? Why are we only learning and teaching this non-Indigenous way to canoe? When I learned how to canoe, I knew the canoe was integral to the Dene people whose land I grew up on. However, I didn't know that it was also an important tool of transportation for my own ancestors. Indigenous nations across this land we now call Canada, including Nêhiyawak nations, designed and built beautiful, architecturally ingenious canoes adapted to the diverse environments they thrived in prior to contact from the coastal waters to prairie rivers to boreal watersheds. The canoe was essential to each nation's way of life as they traversed their land and waterways in search of sustenance, people, and trade. Colonization changed this. In the 16th century, Europeans came to the coast of what is now called Canada and flourished when they made use of indigenous technologies, including the canoe. Traders and settlers adopted the canoe as a practical, necessary tool for exploring indigenous lands and peoples further and further into the interior. The canoe enabled the expansion of the fur trade and assisted settlers in displacing and harming indigenous peoples. The fur trade was dominated by the Hudson's Bay Company, which, with the support of the British Crown, was charged with governing the territory deemed Rupert's Land. The canoe remained vital to settlers as they surveyed and mapped the territory that became the Dominion of Canada in 1867, facilitating European settlement, resource extraction, and industrial development. As Jessica Duncan has demonstrated, recreational canoeing developed in tandem with a broad suite of state policies meant to assimilate Indigenous peoples. Duncan writes, "It is no coincidence that at the same time that Euro-Canadian canoeists were taking to the water in boats appropriated from Indigenous nations, the Canadian state was implementing the Indian Act, a comprehensive set of laws introduced in 1876 to destroy Indigenous cultures and assimilate the continent's first peoples into mainstream settler society. Residential schools forced settlement on reserves, the outlawing of cultural practices such as the potlatch, and the destruction of traditional economies, all profoundly affected Indigenous lifeways, including the construction and use of canoes. Little has changed in recreational canoeing since the 19th century. Most wilderness canoeists continue to come from privileged backgrounds. The majority are well-educated, upper-middle-class white men. Like their 19th century predecessors, they're looking to escape their urban lives and explore Canada. Channeling early explorers, these enthusiasts produce films and write books about conquering the North. They claim to have been the first people to paddle waterways or hike landscapes that Indigenous peoples have lived in relationship with since time immemorial. Canoeing continues to be practiced and represented by non-Indigenous recreational canoeists in appropriative and exclusionary ways. This history is woven into the fabric of canoeing curriculum that I used to deliver. The national and provincial certification organizations and their respective instructors are predominantly white. The knowledge and skills of Indigenous peoples are sidelined, if not completely ignored, in canoe courses. While certifications do incorporate canoe history, these courses often include little to no guidelines for what should be taught, allowing instructors to repeat the same tired stories about the canoe as a Canadian icon that enabled the fur trade and led to the making of a nation. Being subject to these stories is not an option for Indigenous paddlers. Insurance companies often require these certifications for organizations leading paddling programs. In this way, certifications are a barrier for communities wishing to take advantage of funding programs to support Indigenous people spending time on the land. As I reflect on the story Donald shared with me about the importance of passing on knowledge, I realize that teaching canoeing, especially to other Indigenous peoples, is an act of revitalization, resurgence, and resiliency. It is a way for me to connect with my ancestors and culture. As I paddle down rivers and across lakes, I often find myself reflecting on the ones who have traveled these routes before me. The strength and resiliency it took to paddle many kilometers in search of moose, family, or trade goods. I imagine families brought together by these waterways, reconnecting on the shore and having great feasts. I think about how they would have passed down the knowledge and skills of being safe on the water to future generations as they dip their paddles in the same waters. I recognize that these waterways didn't just connect people to each other, but also to all other living beings who depend on water for life. I can see past paddlers watching fish swim, moose drink, and chives grow on the edges of the shore. During a paddle this summer, I had an epiphany that I'm doing what Donald talked about. It just looks a little bit different. I'm sharing my knowledge on canoeing with other Indigenous peoples when I come to their communities and deliver a canoe course or participate in their canoe programming. I am sharing the Indigenous lens on the history of the canoe and its purpose for our nations. I'm learning from elders and knowledge holders how Indigenous peoples have stayed safe on water since time immemorial, and giving space for those teachings in courses. I'm empowering other Indigenous peoples to learn strokes and maneuvers and feel connected with and empowered by the canoe as I did. By passing along my knowledge and skills, I am in turn connecting with my own culture and identity. This is an important part of ending the cycle of intergenerational identity loss and trauma within my own family. The story of the canoe in Canadian history is often told through a colonial lens. The canoe in this telling is framed as integral to the exploration of and trade within what is now called Canada. Unfortunately, this narrative hides the theft and genocide that Indigenous peoples experience through non-Indigenous peoples' use of the canoe, and obscures the fact that the canoe is a symbol of colonialism, imperialism, and marginalization. It also ignores how the canoe is a symbol of resilience, resurgence, and nationhood for Indigenous peoples. So many thanks for listening to my story. Similar to Christina, this is my first time sharing. Actually, no, I guess it's my second time sharing it. I shared it one other time 2 years ago in another video, but it's kind of been adapted since then. And I really appreciate everyone who took the time to listen and who's going to take the time to read this amazing book filled with so many fantastic authors.
Jimmy Gwitch, Rachel Kianaskopton, Masi Cho. It's really beautiful to hear you read that story. And I'm looking so forward to hopefully paddling with you in Dene this summer. Your background and your story got me really excited about that. Our final reader today is Jasmine Voigt. Jasmine is Gwich'in and Sahtú Dene from Fort McPherson. She was raised in Sambakay on Chief Drygeese Territory. Jasmine has completed 2 semesters with Dechinta on Indigenous self-determination with the University of Alberta and community and land-based research with the University of British Columbia. Since Dechinta, she has been studying and working towards her bachelor's degree in Indigenous Studies at the University of Alberta, while also working full-time with Environment and Natural Resources. Jasmine loves to bead and sew, travel, spend time on the land with her amazing son, Curtis. As a young Indigenous woman and mother, Jasmine has faced many obstacles and continues to overcome hardships by connecting to culture and having a strong relationship with the land. She continues to persevere with resilience and hopes to one day use her hardships as a way to help and give back to the community in a traditional, cultural, and healthy way. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jasmine.
Hi, Messy. I'm just going to read a portion of my piece. This is a paper that I wrote during one of my semesters with Dechinta, and I found it kind of had a lot of lessons in it, in the actual experience. So during the final days before attending my first semester at Dechinta, I remember thinking to myself, what the hell am I doing? I've never spent a day of my life in the bush, and here I am going out to live there for 2 months. Living a Dene lifestyle is part of our cultural identity and the way our ancestors had lived, and it is something that was taken away from us long before we could even decide for ourselves. So naturally, I was scared and nervous for what was to come, but I knew only good would come from this experience. I spent too many years disconnected from my culture and from myself because of addiction, so I felt that I owed it to myself and to my son that I needed to show us there was another way of life. It was far out of our comfort zone, and we adapted quickly and learned more than we ever would sitting in a desk. Having been taught self-determination and decolonization in practice, this left me with a sense of responsibility that I needed to keep learning as much as I could about our Dene ways so that I could reclaim what has been lost. While using my knowledge from the spring semester, I came back with an open mind, an open heart, and my son in tow once again. We soon found out that although there are similarities, this semester was far different from our last. With much repetition and similar lectures, I found different discussions and questions would often arise as if it was my first time hearing it all. With the change of season, I soon became aware that the land was about to teach us things in a different manner, and that we had to do things a little faster as the sun began setting earlier as each day passed. We had been given a different set of students, staff, and elders to learn from, as they each brought knowledge from where they were at in life, but nevertheless, we still had our ever-present sense of community. Dene. One thing that remained consistent with our second semester was the adventures we had with Yellowknives Dene elder Paul Mackenzie. Anyone who's ever been on a walk with him knows that you need to be fully prepared and to expect the unexpected, whether it be hopping on rocks and logs to cross a creek or bushwhacking in the boreal forest while looking for medicine. After a couple days of crazy weather and getting settled into our camp, we all began getting sick with the flu. Of course, Dr. Paul, with his Bush PhD, decided it was time we go out to look for medicine. We had gathered enough spruce gum from the island alone, but we were missing one thing: tamarack. There was no warning or time to get ready for this mission, so I grabbed whoever was in sight. Koya, Lee, and I scrambled to get all our gear, then followed Paul and his trusty chauffeur, James Sangrease, to the boat. Prior to this day, we had spent a few days out on the boat scoping around and calling for moose to feed our taste for Dene food. With Paul and James being the hunters that they are, they always have their eyes peeled for any wildlife they may see. We had been cruising in the boat when we came to an abrupt stop, and Paul was grabbing his gun faster than I could even process what was happening. Chi, duck. He was ready to go, but not a shell in sight. Darn, maybe next time, he laughed. We took off to our destination. During our boat ride, Paul and James kept talking about visiting an old man. They said if we go visit the old man, he'll give us moose. Our search for tamarack now had a much bigger purpose. As we pulled up to the island, there had been birch trees about 10 inches wide, freshly chewed down by its beaver. Sure enough, there was 2 of them swimming around, and this time James was quick to move. Click, click, click was all I heard from the gum. At the time, I kept thinking about what unfortunate luck we had and how devastating it would have been if we had wound up seeing a moose with no bullets. I realize now there was a reason this was happening to us at this time. After a good 20 minutes of breaking trail and eyeing the birch trees for chaga, we soon found out that the old man the guys had been talking about, it was a grave of a Yellowknife Dene elder. I soon gained the understanding that it was protocol to stop by and pay your respects to the grave of this man and his loved ones that laid beside him. And thinking back on it now, I realized that was Paul's responsibility to his people and to his land to stop here, to pay his respects and to share these teachings. Our elders don't recite the Dene laws to us and tell us how to live our lives. They simply show us and give us teachings by how they act, how they talk, and what they share with us. During this visit, we made our offerings, prayed for moose to feed our camp, and headed back to the island with our tamarack in tow. Within moments of getting back to our camp, we got word that Gordy and Randy had shot a moose. While they were on their way back from Dede, our prayers had been answered. Masicho. We gathered a boat full of people, and we quickly went out to help with the harvesting process that was soon to be our coursework for the next 2 weeks. With Dechinta being so family-oriented, we brought the kids out onto the site without a second thought so that they were able to learn with us. Even though it had been the first time I've been able to be a part of this process, I felt that it was essential to have my son beside me during this teaching lesson. I feel that extends back to my previous thoughts on my purpose and responsibility to find ways for him to learn these traditional ways and be a part of this intergenerational knowledge transmission. We take these things that elders teach us, and we're basically being the transmission between them and the kids. We're showing and teaching them things that they can't get in colonial school. And having Paul with us during the harvest of the moose made me even more eager to learn. He teaches us, he guides us, and he makes sure we are all included in the process. When I spend time out on the land with Dechinta, I'm able to realize how crucial each person's role is within the community and how we rely on each other to maintain that steady flow on a day-to-day basis. I find that it's very challenging to follow a detailed plan that one may have. The land is our teacher, and we have to work with whatever lesson it may hand us for the day. We all play a role within this community, and we build, and we all have something to offer each other. The Yellowknife Dene offer us their land and their teachings, and we have a responsibility to share our experiences and what we have taken from it. Merci, that's just a small portion of it. You'll be able to read the rest of it when the book is published. I find that each time I revisit this moment in time, I often reflect on all the lessons that we received and how each person had their own version or teachings that they drew from it. This is a reminder to myself with how versatile and how subtle our lessons from the land and our elders can be, but yet hold so much value. It was funny, like the first time I shared this was actually in class, and when I read it, about more than half the people had no idea that we had gone and prayed for this moose. All they knew was that we got a moose. So it's a really exciting moment for us, and yeah, merci.
Merci Cho, Jasmine, that's such a powerful story, and I'm so grateful to you for recording that experience that you and some of your classmates had at Dechinta so long ago, because James Sandgrease was such an amazing teacher, and he's no longer with us, and he passed on during the making of this book. And so with the permission of his family, we've dedicated the book to him. And I think I just feel so grateful that you recognized the importance of that story when it was happening, and that you wrote it down, and that you handed it in as an assignment, and I got to read it. So merci Cho for that. I want to thank all of the writers, Kyla, Thumley, Christina, Rachel, and Jasmine for being on this book panel today and for sharing their pieces with us. I think that this has been a really beautiful exploration of the book. As many of you said, so many of these started out as assignments. And so as one of the people you were handing the assignments in, it's so amazing to see them in book format. I just wanted to mention that the title, Ndè Sı is Wıìlıìdeh, and it means the land is very important. And Kyla worked really hard with Mero Sundberg from Dene to get the perfect title, to teach everyone how to say the perfect title. And Mero proofread the book so many times to make sure that we got the language correct. So merci Cho to Temero, merci Cho to ARP Books, and Irene Bindi, who was our managing editor. During the panel, when you guys were reading, I just got an email from Irene that said that the ship date for the book is June 2nd. So we're going to be having it, we'll have it in our hands very, very shortly. And so for everyone who joined us today, thank you so much for spending time with us. Please order the book from your favorite independent bookstore. You can find more information about the book at ARP Books on their website. We have 40 contributors, Indigenous from the North. And so I'm really excited to have everyone read and share this collection. So thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of the panels at NAISA North.